Welcome to another founder-to-founder interview from Gun.io, your source for hiring world-class tech talent. Today, Gun.io's CEO and co-founder Teja Yanamandra
sits down with Brian Douglas, founder and CEO of OpeSauced, a service that helps engineers expand their portfolio by contributing to open source projects.
Okay, here's Teja.
Brian, thanks for coming out, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I would be curious to hear about your background, like how you got interested in software development, software engineering, like technology as a whole. Like, did you kind of grow up as a nerd?
Grew up a single parent household, so my dad was around, but he just wasn't in the household, like doing his own thing. So we would live in an apartment complex, and in the apartment complex there was like a clubhouse, like a pool clubhouse. And then they had a computer set up, like just a community computer, which is like pretty novel, like mid 90s, cool to have. And we would go in there and like watch the older kids, like the high schoolers, play Wolfenstein. And they would show us like how we could run it ourselves on DOS, which was pretty cool. Because I'm like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm a hacker. Like at the point I was like probably 7 years old, so I'm not like a hacker, but I could like go in there and play the game myself if the high schoolers would let me. Or they weren't in there. So first exposure to computers was then. I think definitely, I was just listening to the guy who created CNET. He worked on this product like before that, Encarta for Microsoft. Shortly after that, we got a computer in the house. And I remember my dad had Encarta on his computer.
Really?
And like we just run through like Encarta, like looking up random facts on countries and history and stuff like that. So like, computer literate pretty early age, and then got into like almost everything every kid in the turn of the century gets into, on like AOL to chat rooms to eventually AIM, and then like played a bunch of games. So like source, like what was it, shareware back in the day? We like find a bunch of shareware to do a bunch of random stuff. But I say all that because I didn't go to school for CS. I went to school for finance, and the reason that because we didn't have money. And I figured if I could learn how money works, I can make a lot of money. Like doing finance, like do like financial advising or stock trading. And graduated 2008 and did not have an opportunity like a job to land during the looming housing crisis and that all. Like basically, there's no internships. Nothing was going on. Especially if you didn't go to school, like a major school. I went to the University of South Florida. So. Yeah, basically did sales for a bit until I was getting my MBA. And then while getting my MBA, I had an idea for an app. And then I started Googling, I know enough. I can learn how to like write code to make an app. Yeah. And I ended up doing it. And like, that's like the rough cliff notes of how I got to getting interested in software and eventually taking the job.
That's interesting. So you studied finance, got an MBA, and then did you kind of find yourself like getting in, like finding out that you wanted to build an app basically because of financial motivation, or is like entrepreneurship?
It wasn't even financial motivation, because I think I was I ended up getting like promoted twice in sales. I was an IT consultant, so like the equivalent of like staff engineer, but for sales at the age of 25. So like I was doing pretty decent at that point. I was getting my MBA because I just wanted to go like the next level, like do some like more bigger deals and stuff like that, to get like basically have a name for myself when I walk the door. Because like, again, had no job lined up for me when I graduated college. Knew if I got an MBA, I could have at least something on my resume to say, hey, I'm legit. But the motivation was really when I was getting my MBA first quarter, we had to do a dissertation on a business, basically like how like inception of business, like origin stories. And I ended up picking Google because I was reading this book called Into the Plex. And it was like the early days of Google and Stanford, and like figuring out like in a garage with the Wojcicki garage. And like what I learned is like they built an entire business, like a at this point, billion-dollar business by an idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Trillion, right? At this point.
Yeah. Trillion at this point. Yeah. But yeah, basically an idea with no brick and mortar. Like everything else, like if you think back in 2013 when I was doing this, the majority of like the biggest businesses were like, oh yeah, we started a restaurant, or we started this, or like I have a car wash, or whatever it is. Like it was always like you got to put in some investment, build a business, and then you're good. But they had an idea, got adoption, and then built the business up later. And my thought was like, what if I could just build something that like at the like 2013 social networks were definitely pretty mature at that point. So I had an idea to build the Yelp for churches. There's like a whole longer story, like where me and my wife, we had a son that was born very early. So we were looking for some sort of uplifting, something to do on the weekend and find the church locally, but not having a lot of context. Some churches locally, like Yelp for churches. Yelp at that point wasn't really good for churches, just for restaurants. So I thought I would just build that. And that's the app I ended up Googling how to build.
Got you. That's cool. Yeah, that's pretty sweet. I definitely resonate like a lot with that story. Like my mom's also a single mom. My dad passed when I was pretty young. And like in our house, like my mom was very financially motivated. I mean, you kind of have to be if you're like in the US and, you know, and I feel like I inherited that. So I certainly, yeah, when I was young, I didn't think that I'd be working in technology. In fact, I like remember this moment vividly where like I'm in college and like you get to choose your major, and I like look at all the people that are like in the engineering school, and like I look at the people in like the arts and sciences, like liberal arts wing of the school, and I'm like, all right, these like engineers and like pre-med people are like way overworked, like their GPAs are like really bad, and like they seem like they're not getting any sleep and they're not able to like work out. And so I'm like, why would I do that? Like I want to just get good grades and like also have time to like sleep well and hit the gym and all that stuff. 10 years later, you know, we're both running, you know, products for engineers. So yeah, it's just funny, but I definitely resonate with that story. Cool. Okay. Where'd you grow up? Florida?
I grew up in Florida, so outside of Tampa. So grew up on Tampa Road. And it's funny because like now I feel like Florida's like definitely overrun with like way more people there.
Yeah.
So when I say Tampa Road now, people are like, oh, I know where that is, and then I can get like way more granular and be like, oh yeah, Palm Harbor.
Dude, our VCs are based in Tampa. Like our
really?
institutional round we raised. Yeah, they're based in Tampa. They're in like
small world.
Yeah, they're like they're downtown Tampa, next to the
probably near University of Tampa.
They're like by the Hyatt, and like maybe a mile from the Edition Hotel.
Okay.
Do you know?
Yeah. So I mean, Tampa's not that big. So if you're near the Hyatt, then you're probably like, I know there's a WeWork right there. It's funny because growing up, Tampa was like a dead, like all southern cities. I don't know if you grew up in the South as well, but all southern cities were just dead cities. Oh, yeah. And now Tampa's way more vibrant, has like a cool little water walkway. Channel sides like reborn again. It's like I'm blown away whenever I go back there and like I see people like base their companies out of there, or like I find engineers that I know of that are living there full time. And growing up, I left Tampa. I guess going back to my story, like I did the MBA, learned how to code, but ended up taking a job in San Francisco, and I left because I wanted to grow faster. Yeah, and I just couldn't do it in Tampa.
No doubt. There's like a lot of line loss in terms of information, and also like the pace of the city, at least the Nashville. I can't speak about Tampa, and you know, I think, yeah, because I haven't lived there, but I definitely what my co-founder, he came to visit once. He was based in Berkeley, and he's like, bro, like how come everybody's stopping work at 5 here? Because we went to like some co-working space we were working out of, and like the lights were shut off at like, you know, 5:30 or something like this, and most people left. And I'm like, dude, I don't know. That's just the culture here. He's like, yeah, that's like, you know, people get in around 9 in the Bay and like grind until 9 p.m. You know, that's just how it's done. So you're in San Francisco right now, or
Oakland specifically?
Okay. Well, I was just in Tampa in November for like the fund's annual meeting, and we had a blast. Like, and there's some solid companies out there right now, like killing it. Like big Series B is like the classic Silicon Valley, like 30 million Series B type of thing. doing it. So
Yeah, they have like a accelerator, like the Tampa Wave accelerator, I think, exists. And I think so. They have TechStars Miami, which I know a lot of folks from Tampa went down to Miami to do TechStars now.
yep,
Yeah, it's a different scene. I'm not as involved. I go back home and I hang out with family.
yeah,
So I'm not as involved in the scene, but like between Tampa or Orlando, I think there's a bit of like a vibrant developer community
yeah,
that's worthwhile. Like 10 years ago when I moved to the Bay, to San Francisco in particular, I made the decision because I wanted to level up faster because there wasn't a lot of stuff happening for developers
yeah,
in like Tampa, Orlando. So the irony is like I used to always tell people, yeah, you got to move if you want to like make a name for yourself. I think that's completely different today. And I don't know if I made the switch today from sales to now in the engineering field, would I have moved? And that's something I reflect on a lot because like now I'm here, I'm raising 2 kids. They go to school. Like I'll probably be here for the duration, like until like an exit or something that affords me to like have more flexibility in the schedule. I just get a lot of value in being here next to where all the VCs are.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Have you guys raised a round of capital like from West Coast VCs?
Yeah, so we did a bunch of West Coast angels. So a lot of folks I know who are like founders of companies. Our,
Cool.
our actual seed round, which we haven't announced, is actually East Coast, ironically.
Got you. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. I think, it's interesting. It's like the capital, like level of sophistication that I've seen from like VCs, particularly in the Southeast over the last couple of years, as like folks have basically fled California and New York has significantly increased. Cause I remember like we started the business maybe a decade ago, bootstrapped it, and talking to VCs, like when we were super early, like they just it wasn't even known outside of the developer community, like what open source was or what we were trying to do, like why this problem even existed. And now
Yeah.
I feel like more and more folks like actually understand it, you know. But I'm sure you didn't really run into that issue on the West Coast because people understand kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. It's like I ended up seeing something like I spent almost 5 years working at GitHub, so like jumping around the story a bit. But
Yeah, that's good.
my job was to lead developer advocacy. So I was meeting with open source maintainers from all the biggest enterprises, top projects everyone's heard of, all the maintainers you've heard of,
Yep.
and like not even limited to like from Python to JavaScript, like all of them. And it was a common thread of we would love to get more insights into our open source. And as we were building a product to basically level up engineers and get them to do open source, we found an opportunity, which is you can't level up engineers without having a place to show them to go level up in or to get the job. So why don't we level up companies?
So there's a trend happening right now where more and more startups are starting with open source first. If you check out any of the batches of YC, you'll see more and more open source companies now submitting applications to YC and getting in. Now, this is a good trend because the scale and velocity of what you can do and grow through open source is off the charts.
And that is an aha moment now because like we've done the pitch, and I think folks are just now getting wind of it, like competitors. But the reality is like folks only go to a certain degree because like if the assumption is open source is all free, as in Libre, no money really. But the reality is like we're currently we're using Streamlabs, which is now hosted in like a WebRTC, whatever, powered by open source on the cloud.
Right.
All these cloud applications all get funneled into getting tons of sponsorship from Google, Apple, Facebook, Netflix. All that money goes somewhere, and it's to fund full-time engineers to keep making this stuff work. So that way the entire internet now, or the entire cloud is now getting leveled up. And it's all being powered by open source. Cause like, if I'm going to choose like WebRTC or something else I've never heard of, I got to choose the thing that has the investment in, like the power, like the contribution. So 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago, you'd be like, I don't know, open source, you sure? But now it's obvious. Like if those who know, and those who don't know, they'll figure it out in the next 5 to 10 years.
What was the original driving problem that you kind of stumbled upon with OpeSauced? I mean, did you kind of figure out during your time at GitHub, or how did you kind of come up with your business?
The original goal. So I worked at a company called Netlify. I was employee number 3. And I was engineer. I built out app.netlify.com. And I like doing open source. Like my goal when I joined Netlify was to do a conference talk. And I did a conference talk. They did a bunch of meetup talks. And then I had a goal of like, I just want to do more open source. Netlify had an open source plan, which is like free for maintainers, but like, you got to let people know about this. So while making contributions to random open source projects, I update the docs to like, what does this change? And then link Netlify in the PR. So like, hey, I made a fix. Also, by the way, if you want to see this live, here's a link to Netlify. I did this like with like at the point, like 10 to 20 PRs at a time. So I need a place to like coordinate or have a CRM basically for managing my outreach and my contributions. And on GitHub, it's kind of hard. Like you have a pull request list. It exists today. It didn't exist before. So like you end up just building your own tools to manage your own contributions at open source, which is a common thread at enterprises and for individuals. So once I built that, then I was like, oh, let me just call this something. So I got the domain opensauced.pizza, where I could see all my open source. And from there, it turned into like a community who also like folks wanted to also do this same thing because I shared at GitHub Universe at their conference about this. And then I ended up getting a job at GitHub because of this application.
Oh, cool.
And then what I learned is, again, that sort of gap of, it's cool to like push people to do open source and rah, good first issues, Hacktoberfest, but like you got to have a place for them to land. And it's very clear that the enterprise is also valid. Like they invest money into open source through back channels and through conferences. Like they see the value. So like if you can basically look at your like the open source you leverage and attach that to revenue.
Yeah.
Like if Node.js misses a release or doesn't ship the thing that you need them to ship, so that way you can make WebSockets work by native, which is like what you can do that now in Node.js. Now you have to go look at other alternatives or build your own alternatives. So like, did you chose JavaScript on the server side? Did you make the wrong decision? Basically, it's a question as an engineer, CTO, you got to ask yourself, do we need to move to Rust or do we need to move to something else that's actually getting more contribution? So if that's the case, there's a direct correlation of value that we're exposing. So basically, like the real reasons I wanted to do open source, what I found is a lot of other people want to do open source. And then what I really found out is that companies also want to find these people who want to participate at that level.
So are you the sort of solo founder or did you start it with some friends?
So I left GitHub on sabbatical and was like, hey, I'm going to build this thing. Like I already built OpenSauced, but I needed to build the version I knew was going to be the thing that companies would pay for. So I told my manager I was going to be leaving, and he's like, "No, do a sabbatical. Like you don't know what's going to happen." So I did a 3-month sabbatical, built this with a couple some engineers I contracted during the summer of 2022.
Yep.
And at that point, we had an app. Like we had a new app, and we had a customer, which was DigitalOcean. So we contracted DigitalOcean to support Hacktoberfest data. This was really just for the DigitalOcean team, so we never exposed this publicly. But it was really, how do you see 563,000 PRs that happen in October? How do you see who they are, where they're coming from, where they're going, and how much is spam? And like those are the questions we were trying to answer that we were able to answer that summer. So ended up hiring a founding team shortly after that, after I left GitHub. So like we solo founder, but I do have some folks with significant equity who came in pretty early with me.
Cool. Dude, I'm disappointed you didn't come to us to hire this contract engineer. I'm sure you love me some good people, but you know.
Yeah, you'd be surprised like the network that I've amassed just by doing a bunch of these podcasts and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, for selfish reasons, I would like you to come use our product and just like tell me feedback at some point. I'm always curious. So,
yeah, for sure. It's funny enough, like we're also actively hiring one engineer right now. And the pipeline went quick, like literally first week of January, got 5 people, just from like some quick Twitter DMs. And now they're already completing their technical screen this weekend, and we'll have final interviews next week.
This is a question that I feel like founders get. Who do you go to for problems? Like, do you go to your investor network that like have invested? Do you have like an independent like executive coach? Like, how do you deal with like, oh shit's on fire, I need to talk to somebody about it?
It's this thing I think about a lot too as well, because like solo founder and like now we're at a point where we're scaling. So I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
it'd be cool to like lift this and hand it to somebody else or like another co-founder, just like run with it
Yeah.
and just know intuitively that, okay, this needs to get done because this is what happens in the business.
Yep.
I will say like my first 2 hires, I've got a lead engineer and then I've got a person who runs operations. Like those folks, I treat them as co-founders. Like even though they don't have co-founder level equity, and like had the conversation up front was like, hey, this thing's already started. Do you want to come in like with some beefy equity that you can work towards? So what I've done is set up like a leadership team where these are the folks I chat with weekly, at minimum weekly. So it's one-on-one separately, all together, at least once a week. And we're just staying up to date, like talking about what's wrong, what's not going well, what's going extremely well, like just kind of sharing wins. And these are the folks that also I can trust to, go learn how to get taxes running for Ohio, because we've got a teammate who started in Ohio in September. So like all that stuff I can hand off to a certain degree. And then what I've been doing in the last 6 months is like 100% sales. So like just focused on just doing that, knowing that the entire rest of the business is still moving forward.
That's what I like doing too. I like having the operations run and like the product, roadmap being executed against. And I genuinely like conversations like this, and then also selling. Although I do miss, I don't know, like actually writing stuff and having my hands in the copy as well. I don't know, whatever.
I missed that as well. And so I was reading this book. I just finished it actually this morning. The Power of Giving Away Power. I don't know if you've read this one.
No, but that sounds good. I'm going to read that.
Yeah, it's a lot of the things that I've kind of done organically already, just learning from other like really good managers and leaders. But it's the idea of like getting people to feel invested to go do a thing without needing to go micromanage and like providing feedback in a way that like brings people along for the ride, as opposed to like the Jack they did, like not really understanding like what to do next. And so what I love to do is like my designer mentioned they were contract with us and then they came on board full time in the summer, mentioned, hey, I'd love to like expand my product managing experience. Like, cool, you lead product now. We have a product sync every other week. You're not driving it. I'm not doing it anymore. And like to see them really thrive in that moment of like, okay, now they own it. They can share designs and they can get feedback. But also they're all customer calls with me, taking notes, providing feedback, showing designs. I treat them as if like they're on the same level as me, because then I can see if they can handle it. And if they can't handle it, it's like, cool, let's just like take a pause. But in this situation, like they were able to like take it in stride. And now they're like my partner in crime as we go have conversations with large enterprises about what we haven't shipped yet.
What surprised you about building your own company?
Honestly, like almost no one knows what they're doing. Like it's a reality that you kind of have to like own and realize, because I'm talking to folks at the largest enterprise level. So I rattle off a bunch of things, but so use your imagination. No deal closed. So can't confirm or deny. Yep. But like you get to that level and like folks are like, oh yeah, we just put our finger up in the air and like we just know what we're doing is working. But when we're able to show people like, hey, we actually figured something out. Here's a journey, here's a story, here's a metric. Like one of the things, so I'll mention this. So read between the lines, but Microsoft TypeScript, it's in repository. 0% of contributors to Microsoft's TypeScript library come from the outside. So if you're a first-time contributor, if you don't work at Microsoft, you're not getting a contribution to TypeScript. And that's like very clear when you look at the data. But when everyone's like, oh, I want to do open source, I'm going to contribute to TypeScript. It's like, well, hold on, slow down. Or I'm going to contribute to React. Like, okay, hold on. Let's look at the actual real numbers. Like, what's the chances of this actually happening? Yeah. First, maybe get a job at Microsoft or Meta, and then you'll be good. Or go try somewhere else. But if you look at VS Code is the number one first-time contributor project on GitHub. So if you're looking to organize like energy, connection, driving folks to like pad out their resume with contributions, go to VS Code. But then the other, if you were to look at the data, it's not VS Code, it's VS Code plugins. So because there's some native plugins within the repository, you make contributions to things about like the extended libraries, and like and it's like I use this analogy all the time, which is like if you want to get in the NBA, and you find out that LeBron James is playing pickup games across the street from your house, you're going to be at those pickup games. Like you're going to be like watching games every evening on TNT and TBS or whatever channels they play it on. I use YouTube TV, so I don't even know what it is anymore. But like you're going to watch and you're going to like learn and you're going to see the process. Like the entire league has changed where now it's not just about, driving to the hoop. Like it's also about your 3-point shot. It's about how you play defense. It's about taking charges. But like if you don't see how the game has shifted, like you're going to still be playing like it's 20 years ago. And I think with engineering, it's the same thing. But it's also with working with like a startup, it's also the same thing. It's like everyone assumed that GitHub was going to build exactly what OpenSauced is building. But as of last Friday, GitHub shut down the actual product that would have built OpenSauced. So that, like, again, like you only know as much as you know. And like once you really start painting the picture for people, then they get like the aha moment. And then it's like you just pay the path. So starting a company, what I didn't know is like kind of honestly, everyone's coming in pretty naive.
Yeah.
So if you just come in, actually, there's a saying that I hear all the time, which is I used to hear all the time: the man with the one eye is king in the land of the blind.
Yep.
And like it's like startup founders is like the same thing. It's like, dude, just open up one eye and you're good. Like you're better than the majority of the other people sitting around you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. How do you spend your time? Like given the average day, like what's your day look like?
Man, it's changing a little bit this year because like we have a bunch of conversations that are active that we need to close or move on and make call them lost.
Yep.
So I did like before the end of the year, constant customer discovery conversations, showing off Figmas, like getting folks excited about our product. We have 5 design partners now, so like we're now focused on just having those conversations with those 5 companies and not doing so much outreach and basically biz dev. So now what I'm doing is I'm doing way more product design in like research and development, basically. So like we have a bunch of these metrics. So I rattled off like these TypeScript and VS Code. Like in statistic, there's a rate of self-selection. So it's and the concept of open source is like how many contributions happen that are not part of you or your organization. And a quick calculation that we're running on projects. But then like engagement ratio. So like, how do you know if a project, like I was talking to a co-creator of Kubernetes recently on a podcast, and he was saying that they wanted to make sure that when you walked into Kubernetes, you could tell it was a good neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like all you want to know is like, is this a place I can hang out in?
Yeah.
Or if not, like, how do I know not to even like walk in here?
Yep.
So like the engagement, activity, repo health, like this calculation, I was doing a bunch of statistics basically like on the regular. So now, I'm saying it's changing because as of like the new year, I've actually been working on a side project to validate some new data we've been using. And the reason for that is like, I don't want to block engineers with my code. So I just build a little side project to like proof of concept what I'm talking about or what I'm seeing in the conversations. And then the hope is to hand this off to the engineers to then run with.
So are developers able to see basically like where to kind of prioritize their time to drive, let's say, maximum contributions, like to get exposure, build their network, all that stuff? So if I'm a dev, I can use OpenSauced to basically help like, make my time like just better used.
Yeah, for the most part, like so today it's going to be much easier if you already do open source because we can just show you what you're doing already.
Gotcha.
And the caveat is also you could see where open source is happening.
Gotcha.
But the recommendations we do have, if you tell us like if you're a Python, like you want to know Python, we'll recommend you projects based on one signal, which is new contributors. So this is something that also, again, this is like sort of inside baseball knowledge that everyone doesn't know yet, but they will pretty soon with OpenSauced. Everyone looks like stars as a metric of like success and whether a project is notable or should be paid attention to.
Yep.
But the better metric is new contributors. Even better metric is new contributors outside the organization. So outside the rate of self-selection, new contributors, because that shows a trend. And those new contributors also come from companies like a Google or Facebook. then that's even a better trend. So the thing that and this is all data we're working on a new like an OpenSauced 2.0 basically that will ship silently next week, and then we'll have a larger announcement once we get some design partner feedback. But the idea is like you have a dashboard where you can see all this data, and have a good idea of like if you want to engage developers or if you want to level up your own career, like you can choose that adventure within our product and platform.
That's cool. It's so interesting that like GitHub has access to this information and like they have not decided to like showcase this valuable information. In fact,
they
like what?
It's like there's a blog post on I call it Minding the Gap on OpenSauced blog, and it talks about GitHub deprecating this little feature, which is organizational level insight. So you have an organization gun, you could see all what's happening across, like everywhere the light touches, you can see it gun. They're shutting it down because of cost reasons and because of AI reasons. So like GitHub completely shifted to shipping OpenAI engagements and producing more Azure compute and stuff like that. So it's like everyone knows, like we can just say it out loud. But they would need to rewrite the entire thing in order to make this work and make it viable. So yeah, I've got a bunch of other details about this, but like I'm happy to say that like we talk to GitHub very regularly. I'm so well connected, and like we're very much prepared to absorb a lot of this interest in these type of metrics. And it really comes down to like Microsoft acquired GitHub 2018. GitHub's focus has been how does this make sense? So what made sense was GitHub Actions, Action Compute, Copilot, Code Spaces, more Azure Compute, and then now OpenAI's partnership. Like I don't know if everybody realized, if you take a step back, like OpenAI, like prior to Copilot, like it was cool. Like DALL-E was cool, like a whole parlor trick. But the first like realistic commercial offering was GitHub Copilot.
Right.
And the way this worked was GitHub was approached by Microsoft, who was approached by OpenAI, thanks to the investment, that built something with GitHub and OpenAI. And Copilot was what came out. And it turned out to be a really, really good investment for all parties involved. So that focus that happened in like the end of 2021, roughly early 2022, that focus has now been shifted, and that's the main focus. So like when you talk about these insights or talk about tech debt, there's not an investment right now because GitHub is on the pathway to profitability, because they're not profitable today, but like they're going to get there very, very quickly, because now they have a very, very strong focus on how they turn the black into green, basically.
So if I'm an engineer, how do I sign up to OpenSauced, and like where do you want me to go?
Yeah. So opensauced.pizza, connect your GitHub. So you have to have a GitHub to use OpenSauced. We do that. And this is frankly because we had the conversation about recruiting and like, do we want recruiters to be on OpenSauced yet? It's like, if they have a GitHub, like they've already crossed the chasm of like, okay, you can swim in the data and like have fun, but we're not catering to recruiting right now. So we only have login with GitHub. And then once you log in with GitHub, you select in the wizard like what languages that you're interested in. So we're continuing to filter the developers that actively want to participate in the ecosystem. And then from there, you can see your contributions, they exist. If not, there's a recommendations tab. We can see repos to contribute to. But the one thing that I tell, because I used to mentor at a boot camp, the best thing you do if you want to make an open source contribution is go look at other PRs. Look at Quest. So we have an activity tab. If you want to look at just JavaScript or Python on the Explore page, look at open PRs from other people, and then start seeing who's making contributions. Because the other game is like, if you see people making contributions, that's a future mentor. And that's my entire career has been open source interacting and people who know more than I did telling me how to do things and like showing me the way. And this being helpful in the entire conversation. So I'm working on a YouTube video and blog post around this like conundrum of like bootcamp grads and folks who've been laid off who are like, I need to find open source projects to contribute to. Like, where do I go? And like the answer is like open source, but the answer is like also maybe don't ask the question. Like maybe first go look at open source, or maybe go build a project, or maybe look at the stuff you're using.
Yeah,
like you check there first, because like everyone wants to start at React or TypeScript and make a contribution there, but no one wants to start with like the project opened up yesterday.
Yeah.
just got a bunch of traction that has no documentation.
Yeah.
When things to go there first, level up, and then you're like, you can make the contributions in a place or get the job you're looking for.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where can people find you on the interwebs, sir?
Yeah. I'm BWEO on the Twitter /X. We'll figure out what's going on over there. And then at this point, I'm on GitHub, BW on GitHub. And honestly, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mentioned I have a YouTube channel that OpeSauced itself has a YouTube channel. We've been doing a podcast called The Secret Sauce, where a lot of the stuff I discovered is talking to founders in open source, talking to maintainers in open source, asking them where their success is coming from.
That's true.
Again, like you asked the question of like what things I learned. Like the best thing I did when I started was we didn't ship any code. When I started my sabbatical, we started a podcast. The reason for that is like once I started talking to people about what's good with them, then I knew what to build. But a lot of times you're like, I'm a founder. I know everything. I'm going to build the thing that I think everyone is going to love and use. Yeah. And then you spend 2 years like shopping this thing around, trying to figure out like why no one wants to use it. And like it's super pretty. It's got tons of animations, but you didn't tell anybody about it or ask any questions about like, would you use this?
Yeah, that's powerful. Sweet, man. Appreciate your time today. This is an awesome conversation.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Happy to hang out with you and check out Gun pretty soon.
You're listening to the Founder to Founder podcast powered by Gun.io's Frontier Network. We release a new episode every Thursday morning, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you stream your music. Please leave us a review and share with your friends. You can follow us online at The Frontier Pod or drop us a line at team@gun.io to get in touch about hiring world-class tech talent.